We are currently in a historic moment. Few have realized this, but history is actively being carved out now. I decided to stop everything and write this video since I realized people needed an on-the-ground assessment of what's going on, since we currently exist in a moment of chaos in which no one really knows what's happening, and those who know a little tend to be propagandists. Since the Trump victory in the last election, there's been this great question. What is the left going to do about this? The great irony is that the left itself doesn't seem to have an answer to that question. This is very important, since even though they are in mental disorder, the left is still the overwhelming ruling class of the Western world. The left runs the imperial bureaucracy, the United Nations, the European Union, the Catholic Church, major corporations, tech, the media, the educational system, academia, Hollywood, and any other institution you could throw a dart at. Without the left, there's basically nothing left in the Western world, since the right is incapable of creating its own institutions as of now. This is a video to look at what's going on with the left right now. This video is my best attempt to do it, since I do not have the ability to look into the minds of the left's leadership to see where they're at. I am going to be looking at the media, messaging, and implicit assumptions behind the left today to figure out their next move. No matter what they do, they will be determining history from now on. I spent a lot of time online studying for this video, watching videos and articles, and if you're anything like me, you also spend a lot of time online. One thing that's been super helpful for me, and I know will help you as well, is Surfshark, the sponsor of today's video. Surfshark is a VPN with 3,200 plus servers in 100 countries, allowing you to really explore what's going on around the world, whether you're home wanting to access other content libraries or visiting somewhere and wanting to catch up with home. Surfshark has a lot more as well. They provide security to all of your devices to keep your personal information safe from big corporations and cyber criminals. As a content creator, I know how important internet security is, which is why I use Surfshark to keep my data safe. They also offer antivirus encryption, and Surfshark Alert will give you real-time alerts when they spot your data somewhere unsafe, providing as much security and opportunity as possible. So if you're looking to keep your data safe or to explore the world online, Surfshark is right for you. And for my viewers, they're offering 4 months extra free, so just head to surfshark.com/whatdeal. And even after you pay, they have a 30-day money-back guarantee if you're not happy with it. So click the link in the description, try Surfshark today, and explore what the world has to offer. Part 1. Will there be war? Although I cover a wide variety of topics between anthropology, history, philosophy, politics, and others, however, the thing I've become best known for is my prediction that modern America is on the verge of a political crisis comparable to the French Revolution or the American Civil War. That America is about to experience a horrifying internal war between the right and the left, which will completely remake the current social order, leaving blood on the streets. If you're new to this show, that may sound insane. However, watch my half a dozen videos on the topic if you'd like to hear more. Especially so, my 1,000 deaths bet has gone pretty viral. Last April, I made a bet with my friend Andrew Heaton that America would experience 1,000 politically motivated deaths within the next year. I then said it on Timcast a few months ago, which broadcasted it out. People are taking this way more seriously than I did. I'm actually not keeping a counter, and the number 1,000 is relatively arbitrary. I find people get obsessive over games where you have a pre-established rule structure. The thing is that if America has 1,000 politically motivated deaths, we really have 50,000 or 5 million or 30 million. The way wars work is that when it rains, it pours. Overnight, you go from peace to complete social breakdown. This is what happened in the World Wars, the American Civil War, the Ukraine War, or even COVID. If we hit 1,000, you'll definitely know. Here we are nearly halfway through February, and it hasn't hasn't happened yet. There's not much really else to say. I was very open for my entire career that my job is betting against God, and I'm very transparent about my fallibility. If it doesn't happen, it just didn't happen. There's not much else to say. I'm not going to fill your mind with useless chatter. There's no need to be children about this. This stuff operates under chance, and the impossible part of predicting the future is the actual timing. It's fairly plausible to get an underlying trend down, but to actually predict when it happens is vastly more difficult. For example, I still think a major war is completely unavoidable. I think it's impossible to get out of the next 4 years without blood on the streets, however and whenever it happens. If it doesn't happen by this April, then I'm going to say within the next 4 years. If it doesn't happen by then, I'll just be objectively wrong. There's nothing else I can say. I see lots of people on my side of the aisle, and I will be open about my biases since they're pretty obvious, and if you don't agree, feel free to take my slant out, where lots of people on the right think that Trump could stop a civil war. I would say we've already seen Trump have 4 years in office. I do think Trump is the best president in living memory, which may sound dramatic, but here's a text wall to explain why. However, a competent business mogul can't stop this avalanche. The issues plaguing modern America stem back decades. The reason I think we'll have a war is that the average American exists in a state of poverty today. Due to complex demographic factors that mostly started around 1971, the average American has gotten significantly poorer, the country has incredibly high inequality, inflation has skyrocketed, and there are huge classes of elite aspirant, politically motivated young people who want to fight. These are the factors historians have consistently found cause revolutions or civil wars. Said in another way, there's no historic society that looks like us that doesn't have a revolution. There's about 20 different variables you could study blasting off that say we're about to have a revolution. If you're new to this channel, I purposely kept this segment short in order to not bore the people who have heard this spiel 100 times already. So how does this factor in with the left? Reality is made by a million little choices stemming from the minds of the players. I know the right pretty well, but the left is the other player in the game. Thus, in order to figure out what will happen here, we need to look into the minds of the left to see what their motivations are for their next potential actions. This ultimate question will determine the fate of our civilization. Part 2, Mind Migrations. You know, there used to be a time when America was a single country. You could drive from Boston to Los Angeles to see a coherent society where people had similar values, blood, philosophic views, national identity, understanding of their shared history, and income range. That's obviously not the case now. Ironically, globalization and immigration have split different regions of America more apart, while the intention was to do the opposite. Do you guys remember 2010? I think everyone who's watching this should be old enough to do so. For the 10-year-old watching this, I want to say I am very proud of the mental horsepower you have to be able to understand this at this age, and if society is still functioning when you're older, you could probably become quite wealthy off being so precocious. However, 2010 was an interesting psychological state at complete odds with the rest of the human condition. 2010 was the last point where you could see that unified 20th century myth of America. I'll watch movies from 2010, and it feels almost as if it was a different reality that somehow I lived in. The last time you could see an America that looked reminiscent of The Simpsons or Home Alone. This was a time when Hollywood and Wall Street were seen as Americana. The reason I'm pointing this out is that our society's collective psychological starting point is this time period. The great irony is that this old 20th century America was a lie and completely removed from the rest of the human condition. This was the era of the blue pill, a society where it was an era which thought that history was over, believed in equality, feminism, progress, secularism, didn't believe in the spiritual, pretended to be Christian but didn't really believe in God, was so wealthy, naive, and many other traits. This was all an illusion spun by the enormous wealth of the post-World War II era. It's so remarkable how quickly we've forgotten the entire rest of the human condition. All of human history outside this warm bubble is very different. Hierarchical, religious, coercive, violent, magical, mythic, dramatic, heroic, amongst other things. The problem is that the illusion of 2010, as time passed, became impossible to maintain for a larger and larger percent of the population. The main story of our times is how does one choose to lead believe the myth of the 2010 era. A major reason I believe we have to have a civil war is that America has become a country where we have different large demographics of the population who basically believe in different realities of the world that have been diverging more and more over the last few years, and these understandings of reality are completely unreconcilable. I am going to split the population into different pills based off red pill terminology, since the only way you can understand the left is to see their own internal emotional journey. A major issue as well is that the society is completely incapable of coming to terms with the fact that the blue pill era was a lie. Thus, different factions have different answers, most of which are frankly incredibly stupid and silly, since the wise and educated older folks who should have brought more wisdom are themselves bought into maintaining the old lie. An important point that I want to say before I get started is that although we inhabit the same physical space as the left, we are not in the same world, if you understand what I'm saying. The word world carries connotations of your entire concept for how reality works, between metaphysics, between philosophy, between your process of just how the environment and human life is, which is why I'll frequently say stuff like the Islamic world or the Western world and that sort of thing. This is a German concept originally. This is a point that I need to emphasize. If you're a rightist, you've gone through an enormous intellectual journey since 2016. I look at who I was in 2016, and I was 15 years old, and I'm in complete shock at how much I've changed as a person, as have my views. The left have been on their own journey, one which rightists don't see. The result of this journey appears as madness to rightists, which it objectively is, don't get me wrong, but it completely makes sense inside the frame the left is holding on to. Let me start with my group, and I would assume yours, the red pill. It frequently feels as if the last 4 years has been God shoving me red pills, saying, hey kid, take another shot and don't throw up this time. I've been red pilled on so many things in such a short time period that I find my old worldview completely incomprehensible and silly. The conclusion I eventually came to is that the pre-industrial world was right on almost everything. That really shouldn't be surprising, given every society ever in history before us largely believed a lot of the very same obvious things, which I show in this text wall here. I don't want to get too far into the right because that's not the point of this video, but suffice it to say, the right is currently in the formation of new mental and philosophic breakthroughs. Of all the fields I've been in modern America, and I've seen a lot of different industries, the new right is one of the most creative and dynamic. You do have the Fox News watching boomer cons who still believe the exact same things as Reagan, but they're aging out. They don't even really hold power due to the Trump coup. The right deserves its own video, but the short answer is that everyone on the new right today have all collectively agreed that the 2010 blue pill era was a lie, and they're looking to further in the past to find a new answer. They're on the right, haha, pun intended, path. There are a few other intellectual tracks which I talk about here in this text wall. In the original edit for this video, I had a 10-minute segment strategically analyzing each of these pills for their strengths and weaknesses. I realized we didn't really need that here, but let me know if you want a video with me explaining these different pills in the future. The right made an active decision to break away from the old worldview, while the left needed to double down. I'm so disappointed that all the anarchist, rebel, punk tendencies inside the left were so fake. They've become complete bootlickers for the regime, and it's depressing to see even communists who are supposedly there to support the working classes betray them for wokeness. The thing is that the way the left differs from the 2010 order is by distilling said order into even greater fanaticism. What that means is that the philosophic conclusions of the blue pill era in their worldview have to be pushed even further without question. Things like equality, secularism, standardization, which are innately false, need to be pushed to their ultimate culmination. Ironically enough, there's two kinds of blue-pilled person. You have the boomer blue pill and the zoomer blue pill. And the boomer blue pill is taking the post-World War II silliness at its original face value and then not changing and ignoring how the world has altered massively since 1970, while the zoomer blue pill is just complete deranged insanity insanity, pushing these originally incorrect assumptions to, again, complete insanity. The 2010 order is already dead since it was always built off lies. The left deals with this by making the lies even more obnoxious. I hope you can see how in the process of doing so, they make it impossible to adjust strategically as they default into being a cult. Ironically, their moral code literally denies the importance of evidence, which is so brutal, it's not even something a conservative could make up about the left as a parody. So what happened with the left? To start, the left gained control over the West's institutions around the time period of the World Wars. You see this in how the Western elites did a tremendous amount to cover up the communist atrocities that occurred under Mao or Stalin. However, the left was absolutely brilliant at psyoping the public, creating the false mirage of consent, fairness, science, and rationality. Over the course of a century, the state and bureaucracy grew more powerful, the culture grew more leftwards, women gained more authority, while America got less white. The left is a kind of mythical vampiric succubi which seduces its prey by saying whatever sweet words to get them to go back to sleep so that they can suck our blood again. It's hard to understand why the left so irrationally hates Trump until you realize this fact. The left created this false mirage of reality in which they distorted human nature, physics, history, anthropology, religion, and any other discipline to reflect back their absurdities onto the rest of the world. This meant that the things that the rest of history would see as complete madness would come across as common sense to a modern person trying to understand the world. The left created a psychological web where once you accept one of their premises, they win no matter what you do. I cover this more so in my video called Shatter the Glass. If a white person moves out of a minority area, it's white flight, and inside one is gentrification. If a man is too aggressive with a woman, it's rapey, and if he's too passive, it's not attractive and it's an ick. The left was able to make our entire world reflect their lies, which made it almost impossible to break out of their web of illusions. The way I did it was from reading history, one of the most difficult fields to purely falsify, and this is why there are so many historians who become conservative pundits. The left was able to even get the right to reflect their own fantasies. The right was able to play along with the left's game of bureaucracy, safetyism, femininity, minority appeals, the college system, corporate America, amongst other things. The reason the left hates Trump so much is that he is a single man who's defied their entire order. Inside Trump is a story of how the left is completely wrong and evil. Read this text wall if you're interested, but Trump is a man who was successful enough that he no longer needed the system. He then showed how the managerial class had been destroying America by appealing to normal Americans who had been grounded under the heel of a machine, whether through deindustrialization, immigration, DEI, the breakdown of the family, the school system, and so many other things. To continue explaining the reason that the left hates Trump is that for them to actually understand why so many Americans voted for him, they would have to completely destroy their own worldview. They have to motivate their followers into hating Trump, since in their false worldview, if they can get rid of Trump, they've removed the one thing that can snap their mirage. Keep in mind that psychological studies keep finding that rightists are capable of mentally understanding leftists, but not vice versa. In fact, rightists have mental models of the left that are 3 times as accurate at predicting their actions and ideas than vice versa. This is for complex neurological reasons I explain in this text wall. Another point I'll also throw in is that if you look at Europe or Canada or other countries, you can see that Trump was an incredibly historically significant figure because all of their conservative parties have been psyoped and taken in by the managerial uniparty, which is why lots of conservative parties in Britain or Canada or Australia or France or Germany are to the left of the American Democrat Party. The number one demographic the left aims at psyoping at this point are themselves. An ironic term invented by the left is a thought-terminating point. The purpose of this is to give an easy answer to make someone shut up and make them stop asking questions. This is a further and incredible example of the point I keep on saying, that you can just look at the left's projections to figure out what they're doing. A great example of this is in one of my favorite movies ever, American Beauty, where a teenager works a crappy job to cover the expensive stuff he buys off actually being a drug dealer. For his dad, although the money he makes from catering is nowhere near enough for his son's obvious expenses, it does provide plausible deniability for his dad's denial. This is literally everything the left says now. It's all some thought-terminating point for their own followers to not have to realize that their entire vision of reality is wrong. It's not for you, it's for them. When it seems unbelievably cringe and completely unbelievable, it's because they don't really care about you believing it at this point anymore. It's funny, when people watch these videos, they tend to think I'm some autistic, hyper-rational person, but the reality is I'm actually a very emotional person, with emotions being the most important part of my inner monologue. I almost perfectly fit the sensitive young man meme, which is a joke they have in rightist circles that the next generation of young male leadership are sensitive young men that do stuff like stare at a well, thinking about the innate nature of life and death as symbolized in the water of the well. I've done that. Thus, when I study a group or an environment, the predominant thing I look at is the emotional state of everyone involved. I'm very intimate with the modern American left, since I have loads of American relatives, I've lived for years in very left-wing cities, worked with leftists, and spent nearly a decade in leftist schooling. I was here for this process, so I know exactly how it played out. A great thing the left never realizes is that the red bubble is significantly weaker than the blue bubble in that almost no conservatives in America have never seen a leftist argument, but plenty of leftists have never seen a conservative argument. The left was very smug and complacent before Trump. It's crazy how many leftists today unironically believe that Obama is the best president in American history. Well, in reality, he was pretty terrible across the board. Obama gave the left a sense of stability, and they had grown used to complete social dominance and that the world was guided towards their vision of progress. After Trump seized power, they had an emotional deluge. I talk about this more in the text wall in front of you, but the left went through something that looks like the 7 stages of grief. The psychological fallout due to Trump winning was enormous. If you want a sliver, just watch the SNL video that came out about it. Funnily enough, I did watch John Oliver and SNL then. This was seen as basically a nuclear bomb on their myth of progress. The left went completely hysterical over pretty menial stuff Trump did or said. In retrospect, how the left treated Trump was completely inexcusable. It's kind of funny that now that I've lived in other countries around the world, the stuff Mexican or African or Southeast Asian politicians casually say is so much more tame than Trump, and no one cares in those countries. This was the period the left started to diverge from reality. I remember seeing this in real time as a teenager, as I saw the left had made the conscious decision that reality didn't really exist, that facts didn't matter, and that the world itself was determined by the emotional experiences of the oppressed, and that power determines truth. Starting then, even as a 15-year-old, I knew that the left would go completely crazy. This, combined with the left's insane purity spiraling, means that the left started from there, couldn't help to go completely and crazy. They literally removed every single mechanism they could have used to recenter themselves from their own madness, since they got rid of all the dissenters while also removing any logical or philosophic reset mechanisms. I loved watching the left squirm over Kamala Harris, since I knew a decade ago that they would culminate in this. Their purity spiraling over race and sex was something they had no mechanism to stop, and thus it would eat them inside until they had to appoint a black woman as president. It's a wonder they didn't have to make her gay as well, or trans, or disabled. One who could barely speak publicly, who was universally disliked by both her staff and the public, and who ultimately lost them probably the most important election of the century. What we're ultimately watching now is a movement which followed its original logic, weeding out all the dissenters and now is short-circuiting. There's a historic event which reminds me a lot of the current left. In the early 1500s, during the Protestant Reformation, Germany was plagued by religious wars between Catholics, Protestants, and then again between different varieties of Protestant. Messianic Protestants took over the city of Munster in northwest Germany. As they became walled in by Catholic besiegers, during the siege they spiraled into complete madness, in which they started practicing polygamy, sexual communism, material communism, and mass killings, with internal civil wars. The modern left is an enormous cult, which is doing the exact same thing, which isn't really surprising, given wokeness is very clearly a descendant of Protestantism. COVID was another example of this incredible hysteria. The left used so much emotion over Trump won and COVID that they're completely burnt out. COVID was relatively tame as an illness, which we shut down the economy, locked people down, and spent trillions of dollars to deal with. I know we all have stories from our personal life about how hysterical the left got over COVID. The other thing is that with COVID, and especially so the summer of love, the left was able to gain complete institutional authority. This is important to realize since it completely changed the calculus and perception of the left. Before 2020, the left could convincingly lie that they were the downtrodden, supporting the common man. After that, in which every major institution was beyond woke, and wokeness was very clearly about complete domination of white men, with their complete removal from all public life, it was clear that wokeness was a very powerful, suicidal, and insidious force that would kill the West unless stopped. Where does this leave the internal monologue of the average leftist? Keep in mind that if you're a leftist at this point, you've been through so many filters that you're so deep into the cult. It was a decade ago when the free-thinking leftists like Joe Rogan, Russell Brand, Shoe on Head, Dave Rubin, Sad Gad, and all the others migrated into the rightist coalition. Keep in mind, the average leftist has probably never heard an honest conservative perspective in their entire lives. The thing with woke people is that as wokeness has become significantly more nihilistic, suicidal, and evil, it consumes more of their minds. Back in 2015, there were loads of leftists who were functioning members of society. They wrote books, had children, served in the military, worked jobs, and all that kind of stuff. It used to be leftists were seen as good at producing culture, making food, and leftist cities were nice places to live. That's not true anymore. An interesting example of this is that in marketing and in sales, woke demographics buy vastly less than their purchasing power should entail. Upon further study, the only reason for this is that woke people were so psychologically disturbed that they just had less hobbies, interests, and bought less stuff than other demographics. Part 3. The mind of a leftist. In the recent years since COVID, we've seen the left hit a real burnout. I think the left burned out and gave up around 2022. Keep in mind, since the left is so psychologically feminine today, they see politics as an avenue to express extreme emotions to allay their own boredom and nihilism. This is why they're so hysterical, but the problem is that given they were so hysterical for so long, they just burned out all their emotional circuits. The left lost the ability to emotionally self-regulate, comprehend their environment, or believe in anything around 2022. A great irony is that the left got burnt out right when they gained complete institutional capture by the most insane group of radical leftists. This is the worst place to be because hopefully after you've attained institutional power, it energizes you so that you can use that power. This is the point you see leftist messaging get deranged and nihilistic for its own sake. It stopped having a real pretense about helping black people, women, or whatever, and just veered into social suicide. I actually rarely see leftist messaging that's per se about black people or women now. Instead, you start seeing the climate become a bigger motivator, given climate change offers a complete carte blanche for social suicide. Ultimately, the way you get rid of carbon emissions is to get rid of industrial civilization and humans themselves. This was something that Jordan Peterson predicted a decade ago, that environmentalism would ultimately lead to social suicide, but I didn't believe him at the time. I am going to coin Lynch's law, stemming from my own last name. Lynch's law is that no matter how psychologically unwell you believe the left to be, they're even worse. This is a phenomena I keep finding in one way or another from all the ways I've interacted with the left. I meet leftists casually who believe the most suicidally deranged nihilistic stuff that you can tell were fed to them by their own peer groups in which they are in complete agreement. This is a brief list of genuine things I've seen and heard in my personal life, not even online. I've seen multiple friend groups of girls my age who all became lesbians together simultaneously. I've seen it normalized among young women that having children is morally wrong due to climate reasons, where they'll often want to adopt a minority baby instead. I've seen leftists talk about banning the air conditioner in the American South for climate reasons. I've heard leftists say that Trump wants to install a racial caste system, forcing non-whites back into slavery. I've heard leftists say that we need to use the state to forcibly deindustrialize the economy. Keep in mind, these types of people are the ones in charge of every major institution. An important thing conservatives haven't realized is that a very important part of the left's evolution is that you saw a split inside the left between the more dissident pro-Palestine leftists and the more establishment pro-Israel leftists. And the Gaza war really split a lot of coalitions inside the left. And what happened is that the more dissident, frankly insane factions of the left stopped believing that their masters at places like CNN or the DNC had a lot of their best interests in mind. So they stopped doing fact-checking altogether, which means that they're getting news from TikTok and Instagram, which has no factual basis, but they're getting riled up. And because they don't trust anything the system says, and that they're so gullible and naive, you can get them to believe the most deranged stuff, which might result in blood on the streets. I've had a couple "you idiot" moments recently with this demographic of leftist. For example, young women leaving TikTok, going to the Chinese app Red Note, and saying China is a wealthier and a freer society than America. And I'm thinking, by literally no metric you could possibly choose, is that true? I've been to China, man, and it's not that nice. Even the nicest cities. Or I'll see other stuff where they'll say that the cartels will beat the US military. And I thought, you know literally nothing about warfare if you believe that. That's just insane. What kind of mind even produces this stuff? This is just sheer madness. How do you predict the minds of a madman? I was trying to analyze what mental illnesses the left has, and the conclusion I came to was yes. My only credentials in the field of psychology are reading a few dozen books on this topic, but the left does show traits of schizophrenia, egomaniacalness, narcissism, PTSD, self-loathing, suicidality, amongst others. Past a certain threshold, it's just insanity, man. Suicide is the dominant endpoint at which they aim for the complete destruction of the West, their home. The best thing the right has going for us is the left wants to lose. Let's enable them in their own desires. The left is at a weird, basically schizophrenic level in which schizophrenics, after losing their connection to reality, will hyper-obsess over a handful of topics which they psychologically can't break out of. For the left, they're super psychologically obsessed with black people, the climate, gays, and that stuff. I remember when I was visiting Boston, I saw all these support LGBT signs everywhere. I'm not against gays, but I thought to myself, why does sticking your dick up someone's ass make you a hero? The left has spent years actively discouraging literally anything except these topics, so they're mentally stuck. I remember when I was in college, the professors literally asking me how my every essay related to oppression. When I was in high school, they remade the entire curriculum to be around leftism. This is important since we stopped reading Shakespeare, Beowulf, or Charles Dickens, all of which they replaced with leftist authors. They replaced teaching history for talking about blacks in Harlem a century ago. We didn't cover the Industrial Revolution, or the World Wars, or the French Revolution. What this means is that the left has lost literally any neurological or cultural ability to move gears. The human mind is a living place where you have to cultivate the ability to think about things, and the left has shut off all of their neurological and mental ability to do anything except go crazy. Ironically, the left reminds me a lot of Imperial Japan during World War II, which in most value or political compass surveys is literally the exact opposite of wokeness, being a hyper-militaristic, hierarchical, imperialistic, racist, socially conservative society obsessed with loyalty, authority, and purity. However, Imperial Japan and the wokies have a core similarity, or the inability to self-regulate their own purity spirals. The thing that's very dangerous about the left today is that they know they're going to lose, and I believe on a subconscious basis, they're starting to realize they're wrong, which I will talk about in the next segment. A horrifying thing to watch in Japan's World War II history is that the Japanese became so aggressive and militaristic that they made horrific miscalculations, ultimately killing their entire empire since people were constantly trying to outdo the other in insanity. This is how Japan declared war on a coalition of nations with 20 times their population at the exact same time. We're seeing a few very dangerous psychological conditions which add up here to something really bad. The first, as we've said a few times before, is the removal of dissidents who would realign them back to sanity, as well as any moral principles that could do that. The second is decades of ego investment without even an understanding of what a non-leftist worldview would even look like. If the left tries to adapt, they will do so in the stupidest way possible, since they can't even understand basic concepts like men and women are different, that white men loathe them from decades of abuse, or they need to provide basic incentives for the people who work for them. They're the spoiled aristocracy of a dying empire. Lots of older folks think that the left is more aggressive than the right among young people. That might have been true decades ago, but the most competent people among the young are on the right. I hate to be this blunt, but most of the young talent are white men, where any young white man of fiber has been purged from the left already. Whenever the left tries to do stuff on the ground, it's so pathetic, either between the Columbia protests asking to be delivered food and water, or Chaz in Seattle collapsing into a military dictatorship run by a SoundCloud rapper and losing their food supplies within a few hours. The left lacks any tactical ability or strategic thinking at all. They can only make wrong decisions. The Columbia protests were a huge tell for me, which I can't understate. First of all, I'm the same age as these kids, and so I know they went through about half a dozen years of anti-Holocaust programming, and then the second they get out of the cradle, they're saying intifada. Watching the videos was insane, firstly since they're so overtly bloodthirsty, which I think was a huge PR defeat for the left. Secondly, they're so obviously Marxist. They were talking about the world's revolution and the need to always carry on the revolution in their hearts. Decades of leftists saying they're not really Marxists has just become thrown out the window. And thirdly, it was nigh impossible to find videos of the Columbia protests after they came out. And you guys should watch the Sitchin Adams podcast, which is a great commentary on them, because it was suppressed by Google, which is another tell about where the ruling class's loyalties lie. It's very clear that this is a dangerous cult in that the Columbia protests sectioned off an area of campus as sacred space that non-Marxists weren't allowed to go, alongside marching and rank and chanting. Also, as I said before, the Columbia protests are useful to look at since the kids are so clearly pathetic, stupid, and weak. They're so clearly artificial as people are in general. They can only exist in the safest, wealthiest, and most coddled society ever. They want a war they'd lose in and they don't realize it. I know a lot of these kids personally since I've worked with, dated, and interviewed Ivy League kids my age. However incompetent and arrogant you imagine them to be, just double it at least. It's horrific to watch. Also, I've been seeing protests saying make the Intifada global. For those that don't know, Intifada is an anti-colonial war of genocide, and the fact they're singing this in cities across America is just insane. And I'm also thinking to myself, you guys really want to try this? Because you will lose so hard. Another factor here is that the leftists themselves are deeply psychologically unwell. If you meet radical leftists, you'll find that their lives are frequently complete dumpster fires. This is since leftism is literally predicated upon mate suppression or giving others terrible advice, like being mentally ill, fat, poor, underachieving, and that stuff being good. If you want a look into this, just look at the lives of leftist streamers, almost all of whom's reputations have been destroyed by one bizarre degeneracy or another. It's kind of cruel that the left said that all that degeneracy was fine, but it actually wasn't true, and then it destroyed their reputations. It's a real bait and switch. One of the most horrifying parts of the left is how much they encourage mental illness. There's an almost hilarious stat of comparing mental illness by demographics, and literally half of far-left women have a diagnosed mental illness. I'm not like other girls, or most conservative pundits, in that I am very sympathetic to mental illness. I think trying to solve the mental health crisis is probably the most important thing I want to accomplish before I die. However, the left does mental illness in the most counterproductive way. For example, as I've tried to heal from PTSD, I've worked with a leftist and a rightist therapist. The leftist therapist kept on saying, I hear you, and tell me more, and I'd say, no, I want you to actually heal my condition, and they couldn't do that. And then I moved over to a rightist therapist who actually set goals with a certain type of EMDR therapy for actually accomplishing certain degrees of healing. I think that's very paradigmatic in that it shows that one of these doesn't actually want to solve your issue. They just want to make your bearing of your own patheticness easier, and the other actually wants to solve your condition. And leftist mental health involves enabling their worst traits. And it's crazy to go to blue states and see young people where they'll proudly talk about having anxiety and depression and powerlessness and other traits. And when you do psychological studies of leftism, you'll find that they have all these things and they have absolutely no interest in fixing them. As I've said in previous videos, the purpose of leftism is to abdicate responsibility, and thus everything they say has to ultimately go to blaming someone else. This puts them in a horrific mental trap of their own making, which they refuse to break out of. Part 4. Short Circuit. I paid one of my friends to watch 10 hours of breadtube content and some mainstream leftist media for me, and then write a strategic analysis. For those that don't know, breadtube is the term for leftist YouTube. He did a great job, and it was actually the origin of this video. I was going through the recent breadtube content today just to summarize whether my thesis is still fundamentally accurate, which is something I know no breadtuber would ever do. God, these people are completely worthless. Nothing they make is original. The only thing they do is mock and tear others down. They have no interest in generating culture, helping people, educating, or making the world a better place. They're so pathetic and nihilistic, I have no clue why anyone would watch them. They add literally no value. There are literally no leftists I admire at this point as thinkers. A decade ago, there were plenty. Throw on top of this, literally every major leftist streamer has destroyed their own reputation through one bizarre degeneracy or another. I know of no major figures on the left who are still going as cultural icons. My friend's report ironically said that the mainstream leftist media was more stupid and less innovative than breadtube, which is horrifying and insane to think. I wonder what they're doing with their enormous budgets. He said that the party line between all of them was pretty similar in that the left is an enormous hive mind. Keep in mind that the left is incapable of generating real leadership at this point due to the enormous envy inside their own faction. However, the big theme my friend teased out was that the left knew something was wrong and that their strategy wasn't working, but that they had no idea what to do about it. Due to the years of the processes described above playing out, they just can't rationally disengage. I think some of the leftist thought leaders are somewhat aware of the lie, but hold on for some sociopathic sense of personal gain or grift. The left is sputtering. They can see that things are getting worse in their personal lives, which is just an obvious fact of life in America today. Their narrative that this is all motivated by white men just makes no logical sense, given the left has the power. They have to know that subconsciously, but the only way they can cover this up is to increase the noise of their propaganda to balance out the outside world. This is why they need to say Trump and Elon are Nazis, which is obviously not true. At the same time, they've been doing the propaganda for nearly a decade, and thus they're clearly burning out. When you look at the emotional fervor through which the left tried to propagandize their own supporters in this previous election, and then after Trump won, you could tell that it lacked the energy of 2020 or 2016. It's also interesting to see the New York Times write an article about Mencius Moldbug, who is a far-right pro-monarchist thinker, and it's not an entirely negative article, and that means to me that parts of the mainstream leftist media are having doubts. And there's this whole conspiracy theory that I'm an acolyte of Mencius Moldbug and I serve his interests, and we've spoken once, which is just, it's people making stuff up. On top of this, it's clear that the left is losing elite support. Elon, Zuckerberg, and Bezos have all left the left, which clearly signals a sea change in the entire tech field. After the latest election, Republicans have complete dominance over the legislature, president, and Supreme Court, or all three branches of the American government. The woke culture and movies have completely failed, while DEI or affirmative action alongside Roe v. Wade have already been knocked down by the rightist-dominated Supreme Court. The right has already won the culture war. The question is how long and how bloody does the victory have to be? From my perspective, the left knows that things aren't working. They know that on the current slant, they're going to lose in America. The question at this point is whether they're willing to gradually fade away or they'll fight to the death. You guys know I believe this will end in war, but I completely respect anyone who disagrees as well. You guys have the reasonable opinion, I'm the crazy guy. I can be wrong. Let me read the room on the left as of this moment of February 2025. First of all, I was surprised and incorrect that the left gave up this last election with no contention. The last two elections were contested, so I just assumed this one would be. Rightists don't like it when you say this either, but this election was actually still pretty close and was not a conservative blowout in pure numeric terms like rightists pretend it to be. The left could have easily won. It also blows my mind that nearly half of voters still voted for Kamala after seeing social collapse occur before their own very eyes. The thing the left is doing now that I find very scary is they're using rhetoric that makes it very easy for them to escalate to violence. Keep in mind the iron law of woke projection. Every major leftist outlet between BreadTube, the TV stations, and the DNC are calling Elon and Trump's involvement a coup. This seems crazy to me, given the only thing they did was win an election. If the left is already saying the right has launched a coup twice, with the earlier one being J6, it creates an incredibly easy rationalization among their followers to do the same. It's also comparable with them calling their enemies Nazis because anything is justified to fight the Nazis. Also, keep in mind, multiple leftist think tanks have already shadowboxed launching a coup against a Republican victory. Secondly, I see the left actively disobeying Trump's orders illegally. Every single day, I see a new piece of news, which makes it hard for me to keep track of it all, but a federal judge is refusing to carry out Trump's executive orders. Alternately, the DNC is publicly saying that it will shut down the government over Trump's victory. On the lower level, you see so much more stuff, with regional governments or state governments actively disobeying orders that Trump's executive office are sending out. Before I release this video, probably at least another dozen examples will happen between the time where I record this and this video goes out. If the DNC is saying it, it's basically orders, since the left follows orders from the DNC in a way that the right doesn't from the GOP. One of my friends likes to say that it's really remarkable to see how much the interests of the Democratic Party are played out around the world in a way that's not true for other political parties, where you look at America's foreign policy or the Black Lives Matter in Korea or Britain, and you're seeing the interests of the American Democratic Party becoming world-changing to the entire global ecosystem. The left has such a well-oiled propaganda machine that it's actually really impressive. I remember that within a single day of the DNC picking Kamala over Biden, girls on TikTok were making pro-Kamala dances, which we know were paid for by the Democrats. Speaking of social media, the results are horrifying. All over social media, we're seeing leftists literally calling Trump Hitler, and it's not abnormal for completely insane stuff. There's a viral trend of women shaving their hair and entering the 4B, or no involvement with men at all, whether sexually, romantically, etc., to protest Trump. I think to myself, what has the Trump administration actually done for you to swear off the entire male sex? Because Trump is probably one of the least misogynistic rulers in the regime that works with him of any ever in human history. So if Trump's too misogynistic for you, I'm sorry, look at the rest of the human condition. Things get so much worse from here. There's this trend called cute winter boots, basically saying that leftists need to start buying cute winter boots in order to start carrying out terrorism and violence against Trump's America. I find that hilarious, since it's the most feminized way possible to call for war, and it comes across like something the Babylon Bee would make as a parody. Reddit is going viral, with the homepage getting results calling for open rebellion. Reddit is filled with all of these subreddits calling for storming the Capitol, targeting Republicans, or assassinations. Isn't it crazy how the left left gets away with stuff like this, well, if the right does it, it's a national panic. Also, let's not pretend this stuff can't happen, given how Trump has already faced multiple assassination attempts. As of now, this is just a palpable vibe, but there's definitely the energy for the left to revolt or start something. If they do so, it would be the best thing possible for the right, given the left would start with zero plausible deniability, as the right would be in the legal right, thus would be able to probably get the entire support of the armed forces and the median swing American voter. The left would lose. The only reason they would launch a war like this is the realization that otherwise they will lose for all the reasons mentioned above. In fact, the major wars of the pre-industrial world have started in that one faction realizes that if they don't have a war, they will lose their supremacy through peacetime. This is what happened in the World Wars, the US Civil War, the Crimean War, amongst others, including the classic Thucydides trap, in that this same mechanism is also what started the disastrous Peloponnesian Wars. Thucydides trap is a term used for the US and China in that you start a war to destroy a country because otherwise they will grow stronger than you. The short answer is that I don't know whether or not the left will start a war here, but it is a rational calculation from the perspective of their leadership caste. Who are the ones who start wars, given they will happily exchange the lives of their followers in exchange for keeping power? What I will also say is that historically, it's vastly rarer to see a large social change occur without a war than with one. In almost every case, large sociological change is spurred by a war, and we're clearly going to see the left lose, so it's more probable than not that we'd have a major war with that. When I look at the things that could be potential casus bellis for this war, I just find them deeply hilarious. First of all, I believe the left to be looking for a casus belli for a war, which means they're looking for a legal, plausible deniability amongst their own followers for why this war is right, and they're not just starting it for no reason. And a black swan is probably the most likely thing to spur that. A black swan is a randomized event you can't predict, but black swans are relatively statistically normal. Secondarily, seeing the leftist hatred of Trump going after their NGO programs and USAID is absolutely hilarious to me, because I've been tracking the left's emotional modulations and their emotional reaction to seeing the government take away their aid money for these various parasitic bureaucratic organizations. It's so funny because they care so much vastly more about this than actually helping minorities or women or whatever. And I just find it funny that once you take away their NGO money and their bureaucratic money, that's the thing that really drives them crazy. And this is the big spur I consistently find among Reddit and the Democrats that they're most angry about. And after that, I think the war in Gaza has the potential to be the thing that they start a war over, because people are incredibly emotional about Gaza. And I don't really care. It's on a different continent. I'm not related to any ethnicity involved. Gaza's a quarter the size of Chester County, which is the relatively small county I'm from in Pennsylvania. It just seems irrelevant to me. But a lot of the left really cares about the Gaza war. And I could definitely see Trump's latest moves to move Americans into Gaza being something that could spur the left because it fits into their colonizer paradigm. And it would be perfect for them to rally their supporters together. Another variable to keep in mind is how delusional, arrogant, and mentally ill the leftist elite are. I've seen statistical surveys of the opinions of upper-class leftist Americans, and they're absolutely insane stuff, like trying to ban cars and washing machines and air conditioning. And I'm thinking to myself, do you understand how much the public would hate you for this? And it's for climate reasons. And there's I don't want to say beautiful article on this topic, but it's there that does the statistical survey, and it's one of the most black-pilling things I've read in my life. These traits are what normally occurs in falling empires, and I could see the left starting a conflict like this, assuming that they are vastly stronger than they truly are, and that they have more public goodwill than they do. They've completely closed themselves off to reality, and also their ego wall is so large, while their energy level is so fervid, that I think they can't not go out with a bang. When I look at the modern left, I see a tide pulling back. There's a palpable lower energy level in the left today compared to the relentlessly powerful hysteria of a few years ago. This could mean one of two things. The first is that they're pulling back for a tsunami, which is what normally occurs with tsunamis, and the second is that the water is genuinely getting lower. You guys know that I believe the first, but I have no idea when a war like this would start, and secondarily, I think the idea that the left dies quietly is a completely reasonable and respectable opinion to have. I say the crazy shit so that you don't have to. However, when I look at the left today, I see a movement which has enough will left that they will refuse to die. I believe the left would literally rather kill all of society than lose, since they've already been doing that for years. They openly say they want a revolution all the time. Take them at their word, since they are constantly saying at this point. Destiny, the biggest leftist streamer, literally said it was morally permissible to shoot Trump voters. The day I wrote this video, I saw Kendrick Lamar openly advocating for leftist revolution during the Super Bowl halftime show. The Super Bowl is peak normie. By the way, I'm super happy my home city of Philly won the Super Bowl again. But if the word revolution is used at the Super Bowl, society's about to go to hell. Before a great storm, everything is still. Have you noticed the culture has gotten deathly still lately? Almost no content creators are still putting out content, in that almost every public figure has already been discredited. There's almost no new music, culture, video games, or stuff that people consume. The economy is dead, while intellectual creativity has died, and no one has children. First of all, I want you to know, I refuse to die, and I am here for you. I refuse to give up, I will keep making original content, and I refuse to sell out to lies. Growing up, my mother would say, life is like riding a horse and it's your duty to die in the saddle. I am yours. Secondly, things seem too still to me. This is eerie. This isn't the quiet of spring, where you can hear the little blades of grass popping out of the snow water going into the creek, which is running a bit faster, while the birds have returned from Mexico and they're tweeting. This is the dead quiet before a hurricane, in which the birds have stopped singing, the dog is hiding in the shower, and you have a crippling headache, while the air is still and humid. I don't know how to articulate it, but something feels evil in the air. I try to pray and meditate every day for 20 minutes, and through that process, I try to disentangle my own desires from the environmental pollutants around me, or the crap I'm picking up from my environment, and then also relating my relationship to God. And I use it as a way to emotionally disentangle how I relate to my environment. And it's felt as if we're leaving the age of the zombie and entering the age of the demon. The age of the zombie is lifeless, monotonous, soul-crushing, boring, and soulless, and all other words related to those of the thesaurus. The age of the zombie over the last decade is how so many people have lost their individuality to the slow press of life today. The age of the demon is when the repressed anger and rage spills out into horrors and terrors. The color of the world turns from a putrid green to blood hot red. There's something in the air that's driving men mad now. Please be careful, stick with your friends, God, the past, and your ancestors. I promise everything will turn out all right in the end if you just hang in there. Peace.